Video title: 5 Real Encounters with the Supernatural Shared by Soldiers. Intro: There is a saying among those who serve: there are no atheists in a foxhole. When the mortar shells are screaming in, and the air is thick with the copper smell of blood and cordite, the human mind looks for something, anything, bigger than the horror in front of it. War is a high-stress environment. It is long stretches of mind-numbing boredom punctuated by moments of sheer, adrenaline-fueled terror. Skeptics will tell you that this combination is a breeding ground for hallucinations. They will attribute strange sights and sounds to exhaustion, combat fatigue, or the chemical cocktails pumping through a frightened soldier's brain. But if you talk to the veterans, the old guys sitting in VFW halls with 1,000-yard stares, or the young ones just back from their 3rd tour in the sandbox, you hear different stories. They will tell you that war thins the veil between this world and whatever lies beyond it. They will tell you that death attracts things. Soldiers are trained observers. Their lives depend on noticing the out-of-place shadow, the snap of a twig that shouldn't have snapped, the silhouette that doesn't match the terrain. They are not easily spooked by the dark. So, when a hardened Marine, a seasoned Army Ranger, or a pragmatic pilot tells you they saw something that defied physics, something that wasn't human and wasn't animal, you listen. Tonight, we are stepping away from the battlefield tactics and into the unknown. We have compiled 5 accounts based on the real, shared experiences of military personnel across different conflicts and different continents. These are stories whispered in barracks late at night, shared on anonymous forums, and passed down as warnings to incoming units. These are 5 encounters with the supernatural, witnessed by those trained for war. The Vietnam War was a conflict defined by the jungle. It was a claustrophobic, green hell where the enemy could be 3 feet away and completely invisible. But for the long-range reconnaissance patrols, the LRRPs, who operated deep behind enemy lines in small, 6-man teams, the North Vietnamese Army wasn't the only thing hunting them in the dark. This account comes from a LRRP team operating near the Cambodian border in 1969. The team leader, a sergeant we'll call Miller, was a pragmatic man on his 2nd tour. He knew the jungle noises, the insects, the monkeys, the tigers. He knew the sound of a VC patrol moving quietly. On their 3rd night out, they set up a hasty ambush site overlooking a trail used for supply running. They went full noise discipline. No talking, barely breathing. Just 6 men melting into the dense foliage as night fell. Around 0200 hours, the jungle went silent. Every soldier knows this is a bad sign. It usually means a predator is nearby, either a big cat or armed men. Miller signaled his team to stay alert. Then, something landed in the center of their perimeter. It was a rock. Not a pebble, but a fist-sized river stone. Miller assumed they had been spotted by an NVA scout trying to provoke them into firing and revealing their position. They held their fire. Another rock flew in, hitting one of the team members in the helmet with a loud clack. Still, they held their discipline. Miller slowly reached for his starlight scope, an early, bulky night vision device. He scanned the tree line where the rocks seemed to be coming from. What he saw made his blood run cold, and it wasn't human. Standing at the edge of the clearing, looking directly at their concealed position, were 3 figures. They were roughly humanoid, but wrong. They were short, perhaps 5 feet tall, but incredibly broad across the shoulders, covered in matted, dark hair. American soldiers in Vietnam often talked about rock apes, local primates that would throw things at soldiers, but Miller said these were different. Through the green fuzz of the starlight scope, their eyes seemed to glow with their own internal luminescence. And they were standing perfectly still, upright, like men. Miller watched as one of the creatures casually bent down, picked up a rock the size of a bowling ball with one hand, and hurled it toward their position with impossible strength. It crashed through the bamboo canopy above them. The NVA didn't move like that. Animals didn't move like that. The standoff lasted for an agonizing hour. The creatures didn't attack. They just threw rocks and stared, their glowing eyes fixed on men who were supposed to be invisible. Miller said the feeling wasn't fear of combat. It was a primal dread, a feeling of being prey in a world they didn't belong in. Just before dawn, The creatures turned in unison and melted back into the jungle, moving with a speed and silence that defied their bulk. When the sun rose, the team found the area littered with heavy stones that hadn't been there the night before. They extracted that afternoon. Miller said he fought the NVA in firefights that lasted days, but nothing terrified him more than the hour he spent being watched by the jungle's ancient eyes. The First World War introduced humanity to industrial-scale slaughter. The trenches of the Western Front were chasms of mud, disease, and constant, terrifying death. In places like the Ypres salient in Belgium, the ground was so churned by artillery and soaked in blood that it seemed impossible for anything holy to exist there. Yet, amidst the mustard gas and the machine gun fire, stories emerged across the British lines of a presence that wasn't enemy or ally. This account comes from the diary of a young British private in the autumn of 1917 during the Battle of Passchendaele. The mud was waist-deep in places. The stench of unburied bodies in no man's land was overpowering. The private was assigned sentry duty on the fire step from midnight to 0400. It was a relatively quiet night, meaning only sporadic shellfire. A low mist hung over no man's land, catching the eerie light of the flares sent up by both sides. Around 0200, the private saw movement in the wire. His grip tightened on his Lee Enfield rifle. He expected a German raiding party creeping through the fog. He peered over the parapet, ready to sound the alarm. What he saw stopped the breath in his throat. Walking parallel to the trench line, right out in the open of no man's land, was a figure. It was tall, much taller than an average man. It didn't seem to be wearing a uniform, but rather a long, flowing cloak that shimmered faintly, as if catching moonlight that wasn't there. Most terribly, the figure seemed to be gliding just above the sucking mud that would drown a normal man in minutes. The private rubbed his eyes, sure the gas fumes were hallucinating him. He looked again. The figure stopped near a shell crater where a group of wounded men from a failed evening raid were lying, moaning in the dark. As the figure approached the crater, the moaning stopped. The private watched as the shimmering form knelt. It didn't appear to be administering medical aid. It just knelt there, radiating a strange, pale luminescence in the fog. The private was frozen. He couldn't raise the alarm. He couldn't fire. He felt an overwhelming sense of sorrow, but also a strange, paralyzing peace that felt alien to the trenches. After several minutes, the figure stood up. It turned its head slowly toward the private's position. He couldn't see a face, just a pale blur beneath a hood. Then, it simply faded into the mist, like smoke dissipating in the wind. The next morning, when the stretcher-bearers were finally able to reach the crater under the cover of fog, they found all the wounded men dead. They had all died peacefully during the night. The private later nervously mentioned what he saw to his grizzled platoon sergeant. He expected to be ridiculed or reprimanded for sleeping on duty. Instead, the sergeant just nodded grimly, took a long pull from his rum ration, and crossed himself. "Aye, lad," the sergeant said. "You've seen the angel of the salient. He comes to collect the ones who've had enough of this hell. Pray you don't see him looking at you." The war in Afghanistan is centuries old, layered over conflicts stretching back to Alexander the Great. American soldiers often found themselves occupying terrain that had seen bloodshed for 2,000 years. There is a belief among the locals that you do not disturb certain ancient sites, lest you wake up the Jinn, spirits made of smokeless fire that resent human intrusion. In 2010, a U.S. Army platoon was tasked with establishing a small combat outpost, or COP, in a remote valley in Kandahar province. The strategic location was a large, flat-topped hill that dominated the surrounding valley floor. It was perfect high ground. When they arrived, the locals in the village below were standoffish. Through the interpreter, the village elder warned the captain not to dig on the hill. He said it was an old place, a burial ground for something pre-Islamic, bad spirits that had been sealed away. The army doesn't run on local superstition. They needed force protection. They brought in engineering equipment and began digging deep trenches for perimeter defense and pits for latrines. On the second day of digging, an excavator hit something hard. They uncovered a section of ancient, mud brick wall and what looked like a sealed entrance, buried 10 feet down. The captain ordered it reburied immediately, but the damage was done. The activity started that night. It began with equipment malfunctions. Radios would blast static even when turned off. Fresh batteries and night vision goggles would drain in seconds. Then came the sounds. Soldiers on guard duty in the bunkers began reporting disembodied voices. It wasn't the usual ambient noise of the valley. It was whispering right next to their ears. The interpreter said the language wasn't Pashto or Dari. It sounded ancient, guttural, and angry. Things escalated quickly. One night, the entire mortar pit crew was woken up by the sound of their own mortars being shifted around. They ran out to find the heavy 120mm rounds, weighing nearly 40 pounds each, stacked in a perfect pyramid in the center of the pit. No one had been on duty there. The most terrifying aspect was the sleep paralysis. Almost every man in the platoon experienced it. They would wake up in their cots, unable to move, feeling a crushing, suffocating weight sitting on their chest. They described an overwhelming sensation of pure, malevolent hatred directed at them from the corner of their tents. They could see shadow figures, darker than the night, standing over sleeping soldiers. Morale cratered. These were hardened infantrymen scared to go to sleep. The captain, a staunch skeptic, finally broke when he was alone in the command tent and watched a heavy Toughbook laptop slide across a level table and smash onto the floor. The unit was relieved 2 weeks later. The incoming unit was briefed on tactical threats, but the outgoing platoon kept the rest to themselves, knowing they sounded insane. The outpost was eventually abandoned a year later, deemed strategically irrelevant. The soldiers who served there believed they didn't just lose the ground to the Taliban. They lost it to whatever they woke up under that hill. The Marine Corps Air Ground Combat Center Twentynine Palms in California is a massive training area in the Mojave Desert. It is thousands of square miles of desolate rock and sand, used to prepare Marines for desert warfare. It is also an area rich in Native American folklore, specifically concerning skinwalkers, entities that can change shape and mimic human voices to lure victims to their deaths. This event occurred during a large-scale night land navigation exercise in 2006. Marines were dropped off in pairs with a map and compass and told to find a series of waypoints in the pitch black of the desert. 2 lance corporals, let's call them Gomez and Smith, were about 3 miles into their course. It was around 0300. The desert was dead silent, illuminated only by starlight. They were moving through a rocky canyon area known for confusing echoes. As they rounded a bend, they saw a figure standing on a ridgeline about 200 meters away, silhouetted against the faint starlight. The figure waved. Gomez squinted into the dark. "Is that Staff Sergeant Davis?" he whispered. The figure looked like their staff sergeant, same build, same helmet profile. Then they heard his voice echoing down the canyon. "Hey, you two, get up here. You're way off course. Get over here now." It sounded exactly like Staff Sergeant Davis. The cadence, the gruff tone. But something was wrong. "Why is he out here alone without his RTO?" Smith asked. The staff sergeant always traveled with his radio operator. They started walking toward the ridge, but Gomez grabbed Smith's arm. "Wait, look at how he's standing." The figure on the ridge was standing at an impossible angle, leaning far too far forward over the edge of the cliff without falling. Its arms seemed slightly too long for its body, hanging down past its knees. The voice called again, but this time, the audio was corrupted. It sounded like a digital recording glitching out, stuttering. Get over here and now." A wave of primal fear washed over the 2 Marines. This was wrong. This wasn't their staff sergeant. Gomez grabbed his radio handset. "Staff Sergeant Davis, this is Lima 2-1. Radio check, over." The radio crackled. "Lima 2-1, this is Davis. Read you loud and clear. What's your location?" The voice on the radio was normal. It was miles away at the command post. The 2 Marines looked back up at the ridge. The thing standing there went perfectly still. It knew the ruse was up. Then, the creature threw its head back and let out a sound that neither Marine will ever forget. It wasn't a human scream, and it wasn't a coyote howl. It was a high-pitched, shrieking metallic screech that sounded like metal tearing. The figure dropped to all fours. Its limbs bent backward in sickening ways, like a spider. It scuttled across the ridgeline and down the reverse slope with terrifying speed, vanishing into the darkness. Gomez and Smith didn't finish the course. They popped an illumination flare and waited, weapons up, until a Humvee came to get them. They never spoke about it to leadership, but they found out later that other teams that night had reported strange echoes and the feeling of being stalked through the canyons. Guard duty is the universal soldier experience. It is hours of staring into the darkness, fighting exhaustion, your mind playing tricks on you as your eyes try to make sense of shadows. But sometimes the shadows look back. Across different bases in different eras, from Cold War Germany to modern-day stateside depots, soldiers report seeing the same phenomenon, the Black Stick Men. This composite account is based on a series of reports from an ammunition depot in a dense forest area in the Pacific Northwest in the late 1990s. The depot had a reputation. Soldiers hated pulling the night shift on Tower 4, the most isolated guard post on the miles-long perimeter fence. The tower overlooked a dense wall of pine forest. The powerful floodlights only illuminated about 50 feet beyond the wire, creating a stark wall of light and absolute darkness. A young private first class was pulling the 0200 to 0600 shift. He'd heard the rumors about Tower 4, that guards would hear their names whispered from the tree line, or see static shapes standing just beyond the light. He dismissed it as hazing. About an hour into his shift, he was scanning the perimeter. His eyes caught movement at the very edge of the light. He focused his binoculars. At first, his brain couldn't process what he was seeing. It looked like a two-dimensional shadow had peeled itself off a tree trunk. It was incredibly tall and impossibly thin, like a stick figure drawn by a child, but 7 feet tall. It had no features, just matte blackness that absorbed the light. It didn't walk. It glitched. 1 second it was by a pine tree. The next second it was 10 feet closer, without any transitional movement in between. The PFC grabbed his radio, his hand shaking, to call in an intruder. But as he keyed the mic, the figure stopped. It turned sideways and virtually disappeared, becoming a sliver of darkness almost impossible to see. When he let go of the mic, it turned back to face him and glitched forward again. It was testing him. It knew when he was communicating. For 3 hours, the soldier watched as not one, but 3 of these entities circled his tower, staying just at the edge of the light. They would stand perfectly still for 20 minutes, then suddenly appear somewhere else. They never tried to cross the wire. They just watched. The feeling emanating from them was one of intense, cold curiosity, like scientists observing a bug in a jar. When the relief guard arrived at 0600 as the sun was coming up, they found the PFC sitting in the corner of the tower, his weapon clutched to his chest, staring wide-eyed at the tree line. He hadn't fired a shot, but he wouldn't speak for hours. He finished his enlistment, but refused to ever pull guard duty at Tower 4 again. When asked what he saw, he would only say, "The shadows aren't empty out there." Why do these stories persist? Why do the most pragmatic, grounded people on Earth, soldiers trained to deal in cold, hard facts, so often report encounters with the impossible? Perhaps the intense stress of military service breaks down the mental barriers we usually keep up. Perhaps surrounded by death and violence, we become beacons for things that feed on that energy. Or perhaps, when you spend enough time staring into the deepest darkness of the world, you eventually see what's staring back. Most of these soldiers don't want these stories to be true. They don't want fame or attention. They share them only with those who understand the unique solitude of a guard post at 0300 or the terrifying silence of a jungle patrol. They share them as warnings. Keep your eyes open, keep your weapon clean, and pray that the only thing in the dark tonight is the enemy you know. Because out there, in the spaces between the battlefields, there are things that your training did not prepare you for.